Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving headfirst into the mechanics behind the spectacular rise and the frankly chaotic ruin of Rome. It's a massive story full of brilliant engineering, wild political backstabbing, and a society that ultimately just buckled under its own colossal weight. You might have actually seen this viral YouGov stat floating around recently. Apparently 4% of adult men and 1% of adult women in the United States think about the Roman Empire on a daily basis. That's millions of people regularly pondering a civilization that literally hasn't existed for over a millennium. It's kind of crazy when you think about it, but it really begs the question, why does this ancient superpower still live rent-free in our heads today? And that brings us to the central mystery of our explainer. How exactly did an unstoppable, continent-spanning superpower fall to pieces? I mean, was it outside invaders breaching the gates? Was it rampant political corruption, crumbling infrastructure, or maybe just widespread tax evasion? Well, as we'll see, the answer is a highly volatile mix of the entire shebang. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll be walking through a 1,200-year timeline, covering 1. From myth to republic. 2. The engine of expansion. 3. Peace, power, and propaganda. 4. Cracks in the empire. And finally, 5. The final collapse. All right, let's jump right into section 1, from myth to republic. So, before Rome became this massive map-swallowing empire, it took a very different path from your standard ancient monarchy. We all know the crazy, violent mythology, right? Demigod twins, Romulus and Remus, raised by a literal wolf. But the archaeological reality is, of course, a lot more grounded. Rome actually started out around 625 BC as just a humble little trading center on the Tiber River, slowly unifying with the neighboring villages. After finally overthrowing a tyrannical line of kings, Rome became a republic. But listen, early Rome wasn't exactly a fair and equal utopia. Society was intensely divided. You had the hyper-wealthy elite, the patricians, hoarding all the offices, and then the everyday commoners, the plebeians. Sick of this massive power imbalance, the plebeians effectively went on strike in 494 BC. And you know what? The tactic actually worked. It forced the creation of a complex system of checks and balances, led by 2 consuls. Moving right along to section 2, the engine of expansion. With their government sorted out, Rome started growing, and they did it through absolute military genius. Their neighbors were heavily relying on the Greek phalanx, which was essentially a massive, rigid wall of spears. Great in theory, but in Italy's hilly terrain, totally unwieldy. The Romans revolutionized warfare by inventing the maniple formation. It was this flexible checkerboard pattern. It's like a giant, deadly puzzle. If the front line got tired or pushed back, they could easily fold behind the second line to catch their breath, while fresh troops stepped seamlessly forward. To put the sheer scale of this military machine into perspective, by the time the Republic was turning into an empire, a standard Roman legion had around 6,000 men. Multiply that by 7 legions, which was a pretty common deployment, and you're looking at 25,000 heavily armed infantry stretching out over 1.5 miles of battlefield, armed with 7-foot pilum javelins, deadly gladius short swords, and really advanced metal armor. I mean, they were a terrifying force to come up against. Which brings us to section 3, peace, power, and propaganda. Eventually, the Republic crumbles under the weight of civil wars, making way for Julius Caesar and ultimately his heir Augustus, who becomes the very first true emperor and kicks off the Pax Romana. But the rulers who followed him, they gained some wild reputations. Take Nero, for example. Popular history tells us he was an absolute monster who cheerfully played the fiddle while Rome burned to the ground. But hold on a second. Thorsten Opper, a curator at the British Museum, warns us that the sources need to be seen as texts with a clear agenda. Modern historians are quick to point out that the fiddle wasn't even invented yet, and Nero was literally 30 miles away when the fire started. So why all the bad press? Well, Nero enacted tax reforms that helped the lower classes, but absolutely infuriated the wealthy elite. And guess who was writing the history books? Exactly. A lot of what we consider historical fact about these emperors might actually just be ancient political propaganda. That being said, the Roman system had a glaring, fatal flaw. Without a clear rule for succession, whoever had the biggest army just claimed the throne. Look at the total political whiplash of 69 AD. It's known as the Year of the Four Emperors, and it is a mess. Galba takes over, refuses to pay his troops, gets assassinated in January. Then Otho takes over, loses a battle to a rival general, and commits suicide by April. That rival, Vitellius, steps up, acts terribly, and is tortured and thrown into a river in December. Finally, Vespasian marches on Rome and wins the whole thing. It's homicidal succession at its worst.
Section 4, Cracks in the Empire.
So what happens when a massive empire built on nonstop expansion finally stops? When Rome hit its physical limits, growth halted. The problem was their entire economy relied on plundering new wealth and enslaving conquered populations. So when expansion stopped, that free labor and new money just vanished overnight. And at the exact same time, the cost to defend these impossibly long borders from angry neighbors skyrocketed. So with all the money being drained by the military, the incredible Roman infrastructure, we're talking the aqueducts, the roads, the sewage systems, just began to decay and crumble. It was a brutal economic domino effect. This economic stagnation boiled over into a terrifying 50-year nightmare known as the Crisis of the Third Century. Between 235 and 285 AD, complete anarchy reigned. Imagine this. Over 25 different men claimed the title of emperor, and almost all of them were assassinated. The Praetorian Guard, the guys who were supposed to be the emperor's loyal bodyguards, became so corrupt they literally auctioned the throne to the highest bidder. In one wild instance, an emperor named Gordian II ruled for a mere 22 days. The empire was quite literally tearing itself apart from the inside. And that leads us to Section 5, the final collapse. To try and stop the bleeding, Emperor Diocletian eventually makes a massive decision. He splits the empire in half, creating two vastly different worlds. Over in the east, you had the Byzantine Empire. It was Greek-speaking, increasingly wealthy, and safe behind the massive fortified walls of Constantinople. But in the west, you had the old Roman Empire, Latin-speaking, drowning in a severe economic crisis, and struggling with crumbling cities. Naturally, invading tribes looked at the heavily defended east, then looked at the decaying west and said, yeah, let's attack the west. Desperate to defend themselves, the Western Romans fell into a fatal trap, relying on mercenaries. They recruited neighboring Germanic tribes like the Goths to do their fighting. But the Romans treated these refugees absolutely horribly. According to the ancient historian Ammianus Marcellinus, starving Visigoths were actually given dog meat by corrupt Roman officials, but only in exchange for forcing their children into slavery. I mean, no wonder they revolted, right? In 378 AD, at the Battle of Adrianople, these abused Goths completely obliterated a massive Roman army and killed the emperor. Rome had essentially trained and armed its own executioners. By 410 AD, the Goths actually managed to sack the city of Rome itself. The empire limped along for a few more decades, but the writing was on the wall. Finally, in the year 476 AD, the last Western Roman emperor was quietly deposed by a Germanic general named Odoacer. And that was it. After over a millennium of dominating the known world, the Western Roman Empire didn't end in some glorious cinematic final battle. It went out not with a bang, but a whimper, just fading into exile. And there's just this incredible poetic irony to how it all ended. That very last pathetic emperor who was sent into exile in 476 AD, his name was Romulus, an exact echo of the mythological demigod who supposedly founded the city all those centuries before. It brings the entire narrative full circle, from a mythical warrior to an exiled teenager. The Romans conquered the world, only to rot from the inside out because of economic greed, endless war, and a total failure to care for their own people. It definitely makes you wonder, what modern superpowers today might be blindly repeating this exact same tragic cycle of hubris and ruin? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll catch you next time.